The feeling that's way more rewarding than working for the candidate, who you think has the best shot of winning, is working for the candidate who you truly believe in and who you truly believe in your heart of hearts is the only candidate who, can make a real difference and make things better. And that there's no feeling more rewarding than that. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Duke's Download. I'm your host, James Duke Mason. And today I wanted to focus on the fact that we had a lot of big primary elections across the country yesterday, June 2nd. We had elections in Iowa for U.S. Senate, my friend Zach Walz. We had a lot of elections here in California, from the governor's race down to races for Congress, state Senate, lieutenant governor, the mayor of Los Angeles. We had the primary election. So a lot of big races. But of course, on a personal level, I wanted to focus on the governor's race, given that I have worked for the last few months on Matt Mahan's campaign, the mayor of San Jose, who's been running for governor since he got into the race back in January. I'm very proud of the race that we ran, and I could not be more proud to have worked for Matt in this historic effort. I mean, he got into the race in late January, years, not months, years after most of his opponents. And I think considering all that, he ran a race that we can be really proud of and that he can be proud of. I first announced I was supporting Matt when he first got into the race in January. I think I actually endorsed him on the same day or perhaps the next day after he announced that he was running. I had originally hoped to work for Rick Caruso, who I worked for when he ran for mayor of LA back in 2022. And I had a lot of hope that Rick was going to run for either for mayor or for governor. And then when Rick announced he wasn't running and Matt announced he was running and Rick said he was supporting him, Rick was very kind in hooking me up, so to speak, with Matt and with his people. And, initially I just started supporting as a volunteer. And then I brought on to be an advisor and a liaison primarily to the LGBTQ plus community, but also just to Southern California more broadly. And I can honestly say that it was one of the most enlightening and fascinating and rewarding experiences of my life. I was on the campaign for about 3 months officially, and yet it was completely insane. I mean, completely action-packed. We went from Fresno to West Hollywood. I had the honor and privilege of bringing Matt to West Hollywood and showing him my community, taking him to the Abbey. I did a short interview with him, which you can watch in our previous episode. But also going to places like San Diego, he went to, Monterey Park, outside of LA, downtown LA. I was with him all over the place. And getting to experience what that's like. California is such a gigantic state. And, I'd worked on West Hollywood campaigns. I worked on, mayoral campaign in LA. I worked on the Obama and Clinton campaigns and flown to specific different places around the country. But working for a candidate for governor of California is like an experience that, I don't think is similar to any other experience. I mean, California is it's a country, it's the fourth largest economy in the world. It's gigantic geographically and in every other sense as well. And so while in some ways, there were moments when it was pretty taxing on me, I can only imagine what it was like for Matt personally. And so I give him a lot of credit. I mean, the mornings, I would have access, to the daily schedule, for his daily schedule, and seeing what it was like for him. He was a sitting mayor too, don't forget. He was a sitting mayor having to also juggle the responsibilities of being the mayor of a city of 1 million people, with also running to be the governor of the largest state in the country. And so, any moment where I would feel not sorry for myself, but be like, oh shit, this is not easy. I would look at his schedule and be like, that guy that guy deserves a lot of credit. And while obviously we fell short in the end, and we didn't win this election. I think for me there is no feeling more rewarding than being able to work for the candidate, not who necessarily has the best chance of winning, because I could have easily, it would have been easy to pick in advance. So who's the candidate who's got the best shot of winning? I mean, Tom Steyer has spent hundreds of millions of dollars. Nothing against him because of that, but he spent a lot of money. He was a front runner from the get go. If my goal had been working for the candidate who I thought had the best chance of winning, I might have gone in a different direction. But there's not the feeling that's way more rewarding than working for the candidate who you think has the best shot of winning is working for the candidate who you truly believe in, and who you truly believe in your heart of hearts is the only candidate who can make a real difference and make things better. And that there's no feeling more rewarding than that. I've been on both sides of a lot of different races. I've worked on winning campaigns. I've worked on unsuccessful campaigns. I lost twice myself when I ran for West Hollywood City Council, so I know what that feels like. But if you really believe in what you're doing, then the result really isn't the point. I mean, of course, you hope to win, but in the end, I really continue to believe in my heart of hearts that Matt Mahan was the only candidate where that presented a real solution to all of our challenges. Of course, it goes without saying that I will support the Democratic nominee. I mean, there are still some things. California notoriously takes weeks for our election results to be sorted and made official. So I don't know in the end if we're going to have two Democrats or if we're going to have a Republican and a Democrat in the general election for governor. But it goes without saying that, of course, I will support the Democratic nominee or one of the Democratic candidates if there are two Democrats. I think the stakes could not be higher in terms of making sure that California continues to be a bastion for democracy and for progressive values in this country, especially given who's in the White House. And as I've talked about plenty, on this podcast, the authoritarian administration. We need to make sure that a Democrat is in the governor's mansion. So I will do anything and everything I can to make sure that that's the case, regardless of who that Democrat is. But I have to admit that there's a part of me that is a little melancholy about the fact that there are big challenges that I felt Matt was uniquely suited to address. Homelessness, which is an ongoing crisis in this state. Crime, which, in some ways, in certain areas, has gone down a little bit. But I still feel like our leaders have not, given that issue the kind of attention that it deserves, given the amount of fear, we've seen a lot of residents and citizens here in our state. Affordability, I think, we hear Democrats who keep talking about that issue, but, we here in California have an opportunity to prove that progressive housing policy can work. We just need someone in office who knows how to actually implement those policies, and I think Matt was uniquely suited to actually do that and to solve the affordability crisis and housing crisis. And so, I'm not going to lie and say that there aren't, that I'm not a little bit sad and disappointed that, we won't have Matt in office as governor to help address those challenges. But I could not be more proud to have worked for him and not just for a candidate, but for a movement for pragmatic progressivism. I couldn't be more proud to have worked for him and to have been part of that movement. And that movement continues. We have great candidates who did advance the general election. Brian Goldsmith, my friend who's running for state senate here in District 24, he is now the front runner to make it to the state senate in November. And I plan on being involved in his campaign, whether it be just as a supporter, perhaps officially, who knows? I don't know. It kind of also depends on how the race begins to take shape for the fall. For the November election, maybe I'll be involved more officially in that effort. But just as a supporter of his, I could not be more excited that he is in the general election. And he shares Matt's ethos of being like, a progressive. He's been endorsed by Pelosi, by Barbara Boxer, by Hillary Clinton. He's a progressive Democrat through and through. But he also believes that we need to focus on results instead of just rhetoric. And I think that's a key distinction between what we see from a lot of politicians today. We don't hear a lot of politicians talking about tangible results over performative gestures and performative politics. And Brian is one of the few that are talking or is talking about that. And he, thank God, will be in the general election this November. So I'm excited to do everything I can to support him. I would just say in closing that while this was not the result that we obviously hoped for and worked for, I want to thank Matt Mahan for the trust that he put in me. I think, as far as I'm concerned, in terms of, my involvement, I could not be more proud of the work that I did and that we did, reaching out to members of the LGBTQ community here in LA. I went, like I said, I went all over the state, all over, for all the way up to Fresno, to, the Orange County, just spreading the message. I'm very proud of the work that I did and that we did together. And I'm going to continue fighting for the same principles. I know Matt will too. This fight is not over for pragmatic progressivism, and I'm going to continue, speaking out through this podcast, through my writing, perhaps getting involved officially or non-officially with other campaigns as well that share the same ethos. And who knows what the future holds? I've said on this podcast a few months ago that I wasn't necessarily done with running for office myself. I don't necessarily know if that'll be in this election. I don't think. I think right now I'm focused on just taking a beat and figuring out what those next steps look like. But I always viewed this race, this primary campaign for governor as just as a learning opportunity, as an opportunity to make a difference, to try to make a difference, to try to make an impact. And that regardless of the result, I was going to continue doing what I've always been doing, or what I've always done, at least since I was a teenager, which is trying to make a difference in every way that I can. And so that is not going to change. And we still have a lot of work to do between now and November. In the midterms, Democrats are in a great spot. We're a few points up, according to most polls, on the generic ballot for Congress. But it's far from a sure thing. We have a lot of work to do to make sure the Democrats regain control of the House and the Senate in November. And so I'm going to do everything I can as part of that fight as well. Obviously, it's Pride Month. So as melancholy and maudlin as I might be a little bit regarding the governor's race, I'm also really excited about Pride. It's beautiful weather here in LA. It's not too hot. It's like in the early, sort of like low mid 70s. So, but it's perfect. The sun's out. It's the beginning of Pride Month. Summer's coming up. There's a lot of reasons to be happy and to be optimistic about the future. I'm going to take a few days to just, take a beat, take a deep breath, recalibrate, figure out what the next steps look like. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep doing this podcast. We have some amazing guests coming up this month, like some seriously epic guests, which I think you're going to find very exciting and cool. So we're going to keep on moving forward on that front. I'm going to start focusing on the writing again, so you'll see a lot of output on that front as well. And I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for supporting me on this journey. Like I said, I've been through a lot of campaigns. I'm only 34, but I've worked on presidential campaigns. I've worked on mayoral campaigns. I've run for office twice myself. And, losing is not easy, especially when you're working for a candidate that you really believe in. But like I said, I am so much happier having worked for someone who I really believe in, who didn't necessarily win, but someone who I really felt deeply and passionately about, than just working for someone because you think, the betting markets show, that they have the best shot of chance of winning. Like, what's the point in that? Unless you're looking to climb the ladder, or just work, or just if it's all about self-serving, being ambitious and trying to build a political career. That's never what it's been about for me. There have been a lot of times where I could have gone for the safer bet, but for me, it's not about that. It's about who do I really think is going to make this city, this state, this country a better place. And so we left it all on the field. And I just can't thank all of you for supporting me along the way, for supporting me along this journey, and for following me and supporting me as I move forward into the future and figure out what that future looks like. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week. Thank you all for joining me on this episode of Duke's Download. Please like, share, subscribe. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to questions@dukesdownload.com. See you for next week's episode. Thank you for joining me today on Duke's Download. This podcast is part of Pride House Media, hosted by me, Duke Mason, and produced and edited by Josh Rosenzweig. Original music composed by Nell Balaban. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review. It really helps others to discover the show. I'd love to stay connected with you, so join the conversation by following me at James Duke Mason on Instagram and X, or by emailing me at questions@dukesdownload.com.